Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi. So today's presentation will be focusing on lymphomas, pediatric lymphoma, and the flow of my presentation would be that I'll give you some brief outline about the lymphomas in general, would be focusing on staging, risk stratification, some basic clinical presentation, and then discussing about the management protocols. It's a wide topic with lot of controversies, no uniformity, lot of heterogeneity, so, but I'll be covering the salient aspects, but would be happy to take questions towards the end. And of course, not would be difficult to cover all aspects, but I've tried to cover most of these salient aspects which are relevant to the management of Hodgkin's lymphoma. So, to give you a background on the lymphomas, these are the third most common malignancies of children and adolescents after leukemia and the brain tumors. And if you look at the lymphoma as a group, it's the non-Hodgkin lymphoma which form the majority, comprising about 60%, followed by the Hodgkin's lymphoma, which comprise about 40%. But there are variations. These are sort of published data, but then there is a lot of heterogeneity even in the published data internationally as well as nationally. And I'll be just showing you how our center sees the various forms of childhood cancers. These lymphomas are uncommon below the age of 5 years, and the incidence increases with age. Why this is important for us as oncologists is because the clinical profile may mimic what occurs in a 2-year-old child versus what occurs in a 10-year-old child. So once you know that in a 2-year-old child lymphoma is highly, highly unlikely, you will not keep that as a differential and you will focus on other differentials. So therefore, age predilection of a tumor is very, very important and one should have a knowledge. So lymphomas by and large will not occur below 5 years of age. That is a general rule. But I'll be talking that Hodgkin's lymphoma, particularly in India, we are seeing at a younger age also. So variations are known and the profile is changing with time. And both major subtypes of lymphoma, that is NHL as well as Hodgkin lymphoma, would vary in your clinical presentation, biology, treatment approaches, and the outcome. So they are actually clubbed into one group, but I feel they are quite dissimilar as regards their biology, the treatment protocols, the outcomes, the presentations, etc. So I just told you that about the lymphoma group. So the first graph that you see reflects the global presentation or the uh, presentation of the childhood cancers. So it's acute leukemia, followed by brain tumors, then followed by lymphomas. So if you combine the NHL and the Hodgkins, this forms this third common childhood cancer. And again, you see this is worldwide data. So NHL far predominates the Hodgkin lymphoma. But on the other side, on the left side, if you see the pie that is reflects our own data, and this has shown time and again. So what we see is leukemias being the commonest, followed by retinoblastoma, followed by Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then your NHL and your other solid tumors, meaning thereby that there is a referral bias because our center is not seeing CNS tumors, number one, and retinoblastoma because we have a eye center where all the retinoblastoma patients are referred and it's a primary referral center. So therefore, biases are known and the presentation which a center sees are highly, highly variable. So as you see in uh, this is another data from an Indian center, published report. As you can see, following leukemias, then comes your lymphoma, and these are almost at par with the CNS tumors. So, meaning thereby that a lot of heterogeneity, variation in the presentation, predilection is known even for your lymphomas, even within the Indian subcontinent. So, if you look broadly at the presentation, the clinical profile of Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's, so there are certain differences, soft but definite differences. There's a typical nodal spread for which is contiguous in Hodgkin's, discontinuous for non-Hodgkin's. Localized disease, contiguous rubbery type of a field would be more presentation for Hodgkin's, rare for a non-Hodgkin's. Extranodal disease, CNS disease, bone marrow involvement, abdominal disease, all these are far common with your non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Whereas B symptoms, which you all know, which is comprising the triad of temperature, fever, more than 38 or 38.3 degrees centigrade, continuously for 3 days, where you rule out a common cause, night sweats, and unexplained weight loss of more than 10%. These form the B symptoms. Then these are far more common with the Hodgkin lymphoma subtype. Then subtype based therapy. For example, if you have various forms of Hodgkin lymphoma, you have 4 subtypes of Hodgkin lymphoma. There, your treatment will not vary depending on the subtype. But for your non-Hodgkin lymphoma, if you have an anaplastic versus a lymphoblastic lymphoma versus a Burkitt lymphoma, we'll be seeing that subsequently, treatment protocols are really, really going to be different. Your cure rates are far better with Hodgkin lymphoma as compared to your non-Hodgkin lymphoma. So these are the broad differences of HL versus NHL. Coming to the sub-classification of subtypes, with Hodgkin lymphoma, you have 2 main groups: the classical Hodgkin lymphoma, the nodular lymphocytic predominant Hodgkin lymphoma. We are not going into the histopathology because that is beyond the scope of today's presentation. But for Hodgkin's classical, you have 4 subtypes: the nodular sclerosis, mixed cellularity, which is supposed to be the commonest found in India, but again variation. In our set of series, we found nodular sclerosis, which is far more common in the West. Then you have the lymphocytic predominant and then the lymphocytic depleted. These are the 4 major forms of classical lymphoma where your treatment protocols will not vary depending on the subtype of classical Hodgkin lymphoma. Whereas in NHL, you have the main group lymphoblastic lymphoma, which could be either T lineage or B lineage. You have the mature B, which is Burkitt or DLBL, and then you have the last, which is the anaplastic, where your treatment protocols are totally different. From now on, I'll be focusing for a few slides only on Hodgkin's lymphoma. So this is how I thought I will focus off through my presentation. Initially some common presentation or pointers to lymphoma in general. Now Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then I'll be talking of NHL. So just to give you a background, Hodgkin's lymphoma is a highly curable malignancy with an estimated 5-year survival of over 98% or even 100%. Some centers, claim that to be. But overall survival, long-term survival is set to decline. Particularly why? Because of delayed deaths from Hodgkin's lymphoma, particularly because of the late effects of therapy. So this is our major concern of late effects. Survivorship is coming up in a big way, and our center is one of the ones who's focusing on a survivorship program. We have a survivorship clinic. But yes, the reason being that late effects of therapies are really becoming manifest once the longevity has really increased. Children are going into adulthood. Most of the children are going into adulthood. So your long-term survivors, your number of patients of long-term survivors are actually increasing. So you are seeing delayed deaths. So therefore, the emphasis is on risk stratified and response-based approach to management. These are the 2 very important keywords in Hodgkin lymphoma management, and also which will culminate in decreased late effects of chemotherapy and radiation. In general, you have a male preponderance in Hodgkin lymphoma, and the gender gap is also far more common in the developing countries. And children with Hodgkin lymphoma in India are presenting at a younger age group as compared to the West, and we have a very clinical presentation. Commonest being lymphadenopathy cervical, which you see the first figure, where you have a continuum of cervical lymph node, classical rubbery lymph nodes, then extend one after the other. Then most of them, about 3/4, will have a mediastinal adenopathy, but surprisingly will not go into a superior mediastinal syndrome, which is far more common with your NHL subtype of lymphoma. So it's very common to have a mediastinal mass with Hodgkin lymphoma, but they will not go into the syndrome. Then you have, infrequently, you will have axillary or generalized adenopathy. With Hodgkin lymphoma, you have very common manifestations in the form of extranodal metastasis, and your sites being bone marrow, bone, liver, lung, pericardium, pleura, and lymphatics is your route of spread of metastasis. And there is a big set of paraneoplastic manifestations, particularly seen in the relapse setting, which can affect the skin, kidney, hematopoietic, and your neurological system. So this is by and large broadly the manifestation. So is your HL in children different from the West? Yes. So what are the main differences? Is that we see a lot of children, almost 15% are less than 5 years. We have had children even of the age of 2 years and currently who's undergoing treatment, and he's responding favorably well. But even at 2 years, we have diagnosed a child with Hodgkin lymphoma. Far more advanced disease, bulky disease, unfavorable disease because of these symptoms, is far more commoner in the Indian scenario when you compare it to the West. Mixed cellularity is the commonest subtype. And of course, our immune phenotype markers are also different as compared to the West. And the factors that are responsible are that we have a delayed reporting, our lymphomas are far more aggressive, there is an altered immune phenomena, and many of our children are treated for tuberculosis before they even think, before they are even considered to be suffering from a lymphoma. Hence the delay, hence the progressive disease, advanced stage, B symptoms, and bulky disease. But however, it has been seen that the long-term outcomes are comparable with that of the Western population. A small series from our center, where there was a male preponderance, significant bulky disease, both peripheral as well as mediastinal, high preponderance of these symptoms, splenic enlargement, and advanced disease. But we also saw a slight preponderance of nodular sclerosis, which was unlike in some of the Indian series where mixed cellularity was common. A quick look at the workup, because a flow needs to be maintained when we approach the management. So all of you know a very thorough history physical examination, particularly relevance should be given to these symptoms. Nodes or site, region, number, tonsils, what are your extranodal involvement, what is the prepubertal status is very important when you examine the child at the first instance and you're planning your chemotherapy. Your whole set of basic biochemistry and your pre-chemotherapy workup, the gold standard being the lymph node biopsy. Ideally, it should be excisional node biopsy. It's a no for a FNAC. In rare situations, you can go ahead with a core biopsy. Only permitted sites are the mediastinum and the retroperitoneum, where you cannot do an intact node biopsy. Otherwise, gold standard is an excisional node biopsy. Then, for your staging in a metastatic workup, you always need a CT or a PET CT. If possible, it should always be a PET CT, because these are the guidelines now. Bone marrow examination, currently bone marrow is being replaced by a PET CT. So if you're doing a PET CT, there is no need to do a bone marrow for stage assessment. And also bone scan if you have any clinical suspicion or biochemical evidence of bone involvement. Again, is being omitted if we have the facility to do a PET scan. This is something interesting that I saw. I thought I will share with you, because this is something recent that is coming up. So this is the PET image of bone marrow involvement. So you can, of course, experience is needed to interpret these bone marrow findings, where a nuclear medicine physician comes into role, becomes very paramount. So here you can have a diffuse uptake in the bone marrow. You can have multiple focal uptakes. You can have a diffuse homogeneous uptake. So any of these can be suggestive of a bone marrow involvement. And if you look at the left lower corner, this is your normal physiological uptake. So see the difference, it could be either a multiple focal uptake, it could be diffuse heterogeneous, or it could be a diffuse homogeneous uptake as regards your uptake for your PET indicative of bone marrow involvement. But at our center, we have given up doing a bone marrow examination. We totally rely on PET CT to indicate or not indicate a bone marrow involvement. All of us are familiar with the Ann Arbor and the modified Ann Arbor staging, where we know that we divided into stage 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on the site number and the region of lymph node and the extra lymphatic site. So I'm not going to the detail of this. Of course, all of you sitting here in the audience are well versed with this classification. We use the connotations of A, B, E, and X. So A, of course, is asymptomatic. We don't use it. B is for the B symptoms. Very important. Dig into the history and be sure that you should not miss the occurrence of B symptoms, where it is recurrent unexplained fever to the tune of 38 degree, persistently for 3 days, drenching night sweats, or unexplained weight loss to the tune of more than 10% body weight in the preceding 6 months. But you have ruled out other common causes. And E stands for extranodal site, which is either contiguous or proximal to a known nodal site. Generally, the sites are pulmonary parenchyma, pleura, pericardium, and chest wall. Now, this bulky disease word, this concept of bulky disease again is so wide, is so variedly used by all protocols have defined it in a different way, and so much heterogeneity about its definition. So, what in the original Ann Arbor and the Ostwald modification, it was defined as the maximum width of your mediastinal mass should be greater than 1/3 your interthoracic diameter, done at the level of T5 or 6 in a chest X-ray PA view. So if or roughly at the upper lobe of the diaphragm, provided the other anatomy is fine. And extra-mediastinum bulkiness was defined as any node or a conglomerate mass more than or equal to 10 centimeter. This was the modified Ann Arbor, the Coswell modification. Then came the COG intermediate Hodgkin lymphoma trial, where they defined any peripheral node involvement of more than 6 centimeters. Then your Lugano recommendations, which is a highly quoted and a very standard recommendations, the Lugano recommendation for bulky disease, they define bulkiness as more than 10 centimeter. But again, they say that possibly now we should actually start measuring the exact measurements and just writing that instead of using the connotations of bulky disease. The Euronet trial used volumetric assessment as more than 200 ml. So as you can see, there is a lot of variability in the definition of bulky disease. The INPOC study, the Indian Pediatric Oncology Group, that is the research body of the PHO, Pediatric Hematology Oncology chapter of the Indian Academy of Pediatrics, and the ICMR guidelines. There is the ICMR guidelines also for Hodgkin lymphoma. Both of these use the definition of more than 6 centimeter for peripheral nodes, and again, one third, the maximum width of the mediastinal mass should be more than one third the transverse intrathoracic diameter. How do you measure that? I'm sure all of you know that, but just I thought since this was a teaching session, so I thought this is how we do it. So it's the maximum width, the mediastinal mass width, and the interthoracic diameter at the maximum width we take, and this should cross the 33% or the one third mark. So that is how we uh, take it as bulkiness. And this node that you see, the measurement was over 10 centimeters. So again, a peripheral node becomes a bulky disease. Another example of a child who presents with fever, high grade lymph node enlargement. You can see big lymph node, almost 10 to 12 centimeter, with pallor for 4 months. Uh, Bulky disease was present. Um, B symptoms were present. No other organomegaly. Chest X-ray was normal. CT scan done, showed bilateral involvement, bulky on the right side with some organomegaly, no significant hypoechoic lesion. So we labeled it as 2B with bulky disease. So that's how the staging is done, taking everything, the anatomical staging, the B symptoms, the bulkiness, etc. There was no extranodal site of involvement. So that's how you have to use all criteria to form the stage, which is very important that a complete staging is done prior to considering initiation of treatment. So coming to the risk stratification. So next important domain in the evaluation is your risk stratification. So it is used in all protocols that treat Hodgkin lymphoma to tailor your treatment. You can either escalate or de-escalate based on your risk stratification. And this risk stratification also has evolved over the decades. And again, there is heterogeneity in various groups, whether it's the French group or the German group or the US group. But then overall aim is to minimize uh, the treatment in the favorable group. So you reduce the toxicity and you escalate. You are able to escalate treatment for those in high risk. So you just optimize the treatment that the child needs, and at the same time you do not compromise on survival. So you just give the right amount of treatment, right amount of radiation, right amount of chemotherapy to the child, and without compromising on the survival. So you have to stage and you have to risk stratify. Okay, so therefore it is very important. And again, variation in, as I just said, but general consensus of risk stratification would be, which you would also see would be, this seems reasonable and to understand. You can use terms of favorable or low risk, where we use stage 1 and 2 without adverse prognostic factors. I'll just discuss what adverse prognostic factors are. It is not only symptoms B. Intermediate risk would be stage 1 and 2 with adverse prognostic factors. Advanced would be anything stage 2, B, any B or bulky disease, and anything beyond 3 and 4. So adverse prognostic factors would be, besides your B symptoms, would be your bulky adenopathy elsewhere, extranodal extension to contiguous structures, or involvement of 3 or more nodes. So it widens the spectrum beyond the B symptoms to your adverse prognostic factors. Then comes your other important concept. You've understood what risk stratification. Then your other important is your risk response assessment. So I told you that Your staging is important because in your risk stratification, you use your stage. Okay, so your staging has to be very, very appropriate. So for your management, one is your risk stratification, the other concept is your risk response assessment. Response assessment is a very important attribute in the management of lymphomas, particularly for your Hodgkin's. Again, because it has a role in escalation and de-escalation. It there is consensus whether you should do your response assessment after second or after third cycle. And also, there is no standard definition for response assessment, it is protocol based. So, for Hodgkin's, particularly, it is said it seems very simple to treat for Hodgkin's lymphoma, but it is very complex because there is so much ambiguity, there is so much variability. So, you have to commit to a protocol and then stick to that protocol. You have to define in that protocol what is your risk stratification, what is your response assessment, what modality you will use, because you can use either a CT or you can use a PET CT, you can use a response based only on your clinical finding. You have to define what will be your criteria for response assessment, and ideally it should be radiology. It should either be CT or a PET CT, and at our center we use PET CT as a modality to assess response. So in the response criteria, you use the four important terms. So one, it is if your child goes into CR, okay, at 2 or 3 cycles, so he's a good and he's a rapid responder. If he it's a stable disease, if there is no significant change, so he's either a poor or a slow responder. Time is going to tell. If there is partial response, that means he's not gone into a good rapid responder, but he has shown good response, he's shown partial response. So he could either go towards a good responder, he could go either into a poor responder. Okay? Or it is a progressive disease where you immediately require treatment escalation. So here you in the first you will not immediately jump for treatment escalation, but in the fourth category you will immediately jump for treatment escalation. Regarding your timing, for your post chemotherapy, you should do a PET CT after 3 cycles. For radiation, it is said you should wait at least for about 8 to 12 days, ideally, before you should consider your PET CT. So, we talked of PET CT. So, how do you interpret your FDG uptake? So, there is a, you would all be familiar, but again, I feel it is good to recapitulate. It's a good learning for all of us. So, this is a 5-point Dubile score. And I find, and every time I feel I would prefer to refer to this because we should not make mistakes while interpreting these. So we know that depending on whether there is no uptake or a mediastinal or a liver uptake, you form your baseline of from 1 to 5. So there are different criteria, different cutoffs, whether it PET CT is done at baseline or it is done as interim assessment to see response or it is done at completion. So I thought I'll share this with you. So if you are doing it at baseline, so you have to use your mediastinal blood pool. So if it is 2, that is your standard normal mediastinal pool. Anything beyond this, meaning 3, 4, 5 uptakes will classify as FDG avidity. Okay. So similarly, if it is the interim PET to assess your response, your liver is your reference. So anything beyond the liver would form your score 4 and 5. If you remember, liver was at score 3. So anything more than the liver would be your FDG avidity. That means 4 and 5. If it is at completion, again it is your mediastinal blood pool. So anything beyond 2, that is 3, 4, 5, will form your FDG avidity. Okay. So just to give you an example of one of a Hodgkin lymphoma child, this was at baseline where you see FDG avidity at all your cervical nodes, axillary, mediastinal, splenic uptakes, your multiple bony uptakes. This is your in between interim response assessment where your uptakes have come down. It's a partial response, but then still there are uptakes. So it's a partial response. It could be a good or a poor responder, but I've done at completion. He's gone into into a CR. He's gone into a complete remission. There is no uptake. Even if you see these bony uptakes, these have all, there is no FDG uptake either in the axilla, mediastinum, cervical, or any of your bone, and your spleen is showing no uptake. So this is a CR. So that is how we interpret our PET CTs. But of course, it's the nuclear. We do it. We have a conference with a nuclear medicine physician, and only then we interpret. It has to be done very, very cautiously. So that completes your response assessment. So there are a lot of prognostic factors which will determine how a child will behave. So a lot of studies have been done by the French group, German group, at the Stanford Dana-Farber Institute. So, but then if I thought I'll summarize, took out these salient risk factors or the prognostic factors from all of these. So these could pertain to the tumor burden, where it is either bulky disease, particularly the mediastinal bulky disease, more than 3 nodes, more than 4 sites. If it is tumor, then again advanced stage, advanced stage disease, B symptoms. If it is suboptimal response, add to interim assessment, at the first interim assessment, less than 70% response. Then the biology of the tumor, your serum biochemistry, your hemoglobin, your high TLC, low albumin, CD markers, histological subtype of nodular sclerosis. All these have proven to be prognostic markers, and at presentation, most of these are available at presentation. So we do form an idea. We do note that these poor prognostic markers are present in our index case, male child, and other identified factors which are prognostic factors which are coming up. There's a role of ferritin, CD8, TNF, soluble CD30, and a lot more. And of course, amongst these, I feel most upcoming would be your first interim assessment, PET CT after second or third cycle, which is a very good prognostic marker for ultimate response. Coming to the historical overview of treatment. Now coming to the treatment part. So all this background I feel is really, really relevant to understand the treatment. So this has really evolved, you comprising radiation, multi-agent chemotherapy, and a combined modality. So if you just look at the first section, the radiation using as a modality, so it was used. Maybe it was popular initially, but then we know that it's a child, it's a growing skeleton. The immature skeleton is going to really, really face the brunt of radiation, high dose radiation. Then there is a lot of cardiopulmonary toxicity. The chances of a second neoplasm, which will manifest as late effects, particularly if these children are now living longer, they're emerging as long-term survivors. So these were the concerns. So we thought that, so all the others thought that this would not be as a sole modality would not be a good choice, and it should be a low dose in combination with multi-agent chemotherapy. So then multi-agent chemotherapy, non-cross-resistant combinations, MOP, ABVD, etc. were being used. Even when we were SRs, we were treating our children with MOP and COP and not realizing that almost all of them will go into a sterility as a late effect. And now currently, we hardly use MOP and COP as treatment protocols for Hodgkin lymphoma. Then these were highly toxic. So to overcome that, they started using hybrid regimes to take care of this toxicity. At the same time, they also realized that chemotherapy alone treatment protocol will probably give higher cumulative doses of certain chemotherapy like alkylating agents, for example, they can cause, or anthracycline cause a lot of toxicity and late effects. So again, there were drawbacks with this modality also. So then came this concept of combined modality treatment where radiation therapy and multi-agent chemotherapy should be used. So this should be the ideal choice, which will reduce the toxicity of both the modalities. And this is widely used, but again, I'm emphasizing on survivorship and late effect concept. So again and again, we are focusing on the concept of maybe the trends are again tilting towards using of chemotherapy and protocols, but there is definitely a role of radiation. But we will not. Many centers are not using RT for all patients of Hodgkin lymphoma. So there is no standard single treatment approach uniformly popularized or followed. Our determinants when we choose our risk stratification, response to initial chemotherapy, these are the first two most important. Age, small child, male sex, associate comorbidities, if it's a relapsed case, particularly a very relevant stage of the disease. So all these become very important determinants when we choose our protocol. Chemotherapy will be given to all our patients. There's at present no role for radiation alone protocols, as I just discussed, and combination chemotherapy preferred over a single agent to mitigate the side effects or toxic effects of isolated single agent chemotherapy. So, therefore, the aim was to minimize the short as well as long term toxicity without compromising on the efficacy and cure. So, now comes the this is a busy slide, but it is important. But I will not be discussing on all the studies. These are the studies for favorable group. So as you, what I want you to realize is that these some are journal, the German group, the French group, then the US, the pediatric oncology group, the children cancer group. So these are, studies have been are their prerogative. But then these, if you look at this, look at the stage also. So even if I say favorable, there is a lot of heterogeneity in the stage that they have used. So all groups have formed their own definition, and they abide by those definitions, and they conduct their studies. So, for example, first study I wanted to highlight was this is a German study, which was the first to eliminate radiation therapy for patients who went into CR at the end of all chemotherapy. This was the favorable group. Logical that if they have gone into CR and they were earlier favorable group, so there was possibly no need for giving RT, and their OS etc. was comparable with the other studies. This was the other study performed by the same group where they gave RT and they did not give RT for children who received who went into CR, and as you can see, the OS and EFS is very comparable. So therefore, they were justified in omitting end treatment RT for those patients who went into CR. The other thing that was highlighted was that this was the first study which removed the exposure or which substituted procarbazine with etoposide, thus giving origin to the protocol known as OEPA. Okay, from OPA to OEPA, because knowing that this is a gonadotoxic chemotherapy, procarbazine, so this is how protocols develop, evolve, and then and studies sort of give inferences, and we are able to reach to some definite conclusion. So even for example, this study, the St. Jude, Dana-Farber, the last study, there are all similar studies. I will not discuss on all, but all of them have been by and large RCTs, and they have given radiation to one and to the other. Most of them have found comparable results. For example, in the last study only, so if no RT was given versus RT was given versus in those children where who did not achieve CR, RT was given, and to those if no RT was given, our results were comparable. So, meaning thereby that at least in the favorable group, so I think in the favorable group of patients, foregoing RT would be a very valid option, and which many of us are resorting to. So then coming to your high risk or your intermediate group. Similar studies have been done here. So by again the German, the British, the US groups. So similar randomization, similar variability in your staging, a lot of variability, heterogeneity in the protocols that were used. I still thought I'll focus on one study. Just I arbitrarily picked up one study which focused on the very broad, sort of they encompassed both intermediate as well as high risk population. So to all these patients, they gave BCOP. BCOP is another intensive protocol, which is a highly toxic protocol, which is known to cause high prevalence of febrile neutropenias. So they gave 4 cycles of BCOP to all. Then after that, they had this group of rapid early responders, and in those who were female, they gave 4 cycles of COP or ABV. Then there was rapid early responders who were males. They gave ABVD to those, did not give COP, did not give ABVD for reasons for the gonadotoxic effect. Then there was this third group, which was slow early responders. To this set of population, they gave 4 more cycles of BCOP. So ideally, it is 6 to 8 cycles of BCOP, which is a standard protocol. So they gave 4 cycles to all. Then they evaluated who were early responders, rapid early responders. Girls were given COP or ABV, boys were given ABVD, and slow early responders were given 4 more cycles. So one did not get RT, 2 and 3 got RT. Okay, and of course if they were not in CR, they got an additional boost. So if you can see the overall survival, the disease-free survival, EFS, everything was comparable. So again, throwing some light that maybe chemotherapy, there may be more biological factors which will determine or more may emerge later that which will determine the need for RT or foregoing RT. So in coming to now Indian studies, we have few studies, most of them are retrospective, okay, and most of them have not restratified. We have used all 4 stages on almost all of these studies, and except for first study which was a RCT and by Dr. Laskar. This is in fact an old study, but it was an RCT prospective study, but otherwise most of the other studies have been retrospective. And this study, although determined that EFS and OS were far better in the arm that used ABVD with radiation as compared to the arm that used ABVD alone. So there is, again, I'm saying that it is not, maybe more studies are required which will finally make a consensus statement whether RT can be forgiven in which modality, which type of favorable, unfavorable, which risk, etc. Yes, we do have studies both ways to show benefits and of and or against you or which are comparable to chemotherapy alone or I mean to say which will say we have studies which will say or which will point towards the benefit of radiation along with chemotherapy, a combined modality approach, or even some which are focusing only on chemotherapy alone alone protocols. We have a lot of a few studies from the Indian setting also. We have one from PGI, one from our center, which have used radiation sparing protocols. Even one we recently published, which was also where we very sparingly used radiation, and our and all our children, the results have been comparable. So again, throwing light on the fact that maybe a certain segment of our children could be treated very well on radiation sparing protocols. So there is a need to do these studies in a prospective, in a randomized controlled manner. Only then I think these answers can be sought, and also done in various regions. All data from the West cannot be extrapolated to our Indian setting. So there was a meta-analysis of 958 children in India of Indian children. So the mean age of presentation was about 7 to 9 years. Uh, Male preponderance, majority had advanced disease, mixed cellularity was common, and treatment consisted of both chemotherapy and radiation. There was variation in the protocol. For us, most common use protocol is ABVD, although there is a wide variety and there is no superiority of one protocol over the other. One need to be cautious of the cumulative doses that are used in various protocols. And multi-agent chemotherapy without radiation may be sufficient in a majority of patients. This was the inference made in this meta-analysis, but then again, many of these studies have been retrospective here, and only I think one was prospective. And radiotherapy can be reserved for patients with bulky disease or who are not responding to chemotherapy alone protocols. And in our Indian perspective, there are other factors also which determine the choice or maybe are tilting towards radiation sparing because the facility or the expertise of radiation oncology is maybe not available. So also is true for our PET CT facility. So possibly these are the reasons where PET CT and radiation are maybe sparing protocols are being considered. So coming to the INFOC Hodgkin lymphoma study, this is important because it's the first attempt to study. I've been saying this prospective studies are important. So this is the first study done prospectively, which will throw light on the epidemiology and of Hodgkin lymphoma in children and adolescent. And all of these will be treated uniformly in a risk stratified response-based strategy where ABVD was a protocol that was used, and we had and almost 27 centers across India have participated. So early stage, that was 1 and 2A, received 4 cycles of ABVD. The advanced stage, which was 2B and 3-4, received 6 cycles. Response was assessed. We committed to response assessment after 2 cycles, did not leave any ambiguity as to after 2 or 3. And radiation was reserved for bulky disease or suboptimal response after 2 cycles. So we committed to the protocol and then stuck to that protocol. And events were, of course, either death or progression, relapse, or a second neoplasm, which is unlikely. But yes, these were what was defined in the protocol. And bulky disease and etc., as I've just mentioned, they were all defined as I discussed in the earlier slides. And the preliminary results of 2-year overall survival are quite promising to the tune of almost 97% with a median follow-up of about 8 months. So this follow-up, this study is going to throw light on because there are set. We have defined the protocol. It is done prospectively. All definitions are in place as to stage, risk stratification, response assessment, modality of response, use of radiation, and the chemotherapy protocol and the cycle that we use for every stage. So hopefully we will have really meaningful data in a prospective study from our own Indian study group. So if you now just summing up the Hodgkin lymphoma would be that summing up of almost whatever I have talked, it's low risk, early favorable, recommended would be 2 to 4 cycles of non-cross resistant chemotherapy. IFRT may be omitted if your interim PET first analysis is CR. Some 6 cycles may be used in a clinical trial setting. 4 cycle of chemotherapy may be used. Intermediate risk, we have already described that. So 4 to 6 cycles of cross-resistant chemotherapy with IFRT, or if you without radiation protocols, we'll use about 6 to 8 cycles of non-cross resistant chemotherapy. For high risk, again, you will have 6 to 8 cycles along with IFRT, or 8 cycles without IFRT. So again, all options, all risks will have options for chemotherapy with IFRT or chemotherapy without IFRT. Trends are towards the use of chemotherapy alone protocol, because as pediatricians, we really are worried and really consider this as a major threat that of survivorship of late effects and radiation. Of course, once mediastinum, neck are two common sites where we will a Hodgkin lymphoma patient is going to land up if it's a bulky disease, receiving radiation, and of course we subject the child to a lot of late effects. So trends are towards use of chemotherapy among protocols. Again, radiation, as I've already discussed, a lot of collaborators studies are there which have used radiation. So again, the dictum is that if the child is not in CR, the doses again vary from 15 to 25 rays depending on age, disease, post chemotherapy, residual disease, and these are the criteria that have been considered even in the INFOX study. And radiation have been used particularly if there has been a suboptimal response to chemotherapy, be it at interim assessment or at treatment completion. So, a quick word about the relapsed or refractory. So, 10% of these patients would relapse, and generally, relapse would occur within the first 3 years. A biopsy is a must. This is a must to confirm a relapse. And as of now, as we stand today, there is no role for PET-CT in the surveillance. And treatment and ultimate prognosis will depend on the initial therapy. What was the stage, what was the chemotherapy that we used, what was the cumulative therapy, what was it unfavorable disease, what was the time of relapse, what was the chemotherapy to the chemosensitivity to the salvage therapy that we are giving. So all these will determine the outcome of a relapse Hodgkin lymphoma. Not discussing this in detail. And of course, just to mention the options would be your chemotherapy, then followed by autologous stem cell, either only chemotherapy plus minus some target therapy, chemotherapy followed by autologous HSCT, or chemotherapy with allogenic, or it's these are the 3 or 4 main modalities that are considered while using. And of course, often it depends on how the child has responded after the initial 2 courses of a relapse protocol. Follow-up and late effects are of concern. More important would be musculoskeletal, cardiovascular, a whole galaxy of cardiovascular sequelae, pulmonary sequelae, endocrine dysfunction, thyroid, sterility, uh, infections, second neoplasm, girl child receiving radiation. So all a whole galaxy of late effects are important here. Very important is our cardiotoxicity, particularly for our high risk children, where we are really concerned. We monitor these children. We monitor the cumulative dose of anthracyclines with without radiation, and then they are subjected to a full protocol of follow-up, rigorous follow-up of whether doing cardiac biomarkers or periodic echocardiography to pick up cardiac dysfunction early. I'm not going through the details of these, but yes, one should know that any dose beyond 250 milligram per meter square of anthracycline puts the child at a high risk, and this dose is lessened if the child has got in addition radiation. For example, if he's got 100, if he gets a radiation dose of 15 to 35 rays, then even your 100, even if it dose less than 250 milligrams per meter square are going to be equally toxic or even more toxic as regards cardiac dysfunction is concerned for that child. So this completes my by my description of the Hodgkin lymphoma. Now I'll be quickly going through the NHL. So non-Hodgkin lymphoma comprises again. I don't know if there are any questions or will it be taken the end. I don't know. So I'll Dr. Google, should I continue with the NHL?
Ma'am, please, I think we still have time,
Okay.
and we can continue for another 20-25 minutes easily, ma'am.
Okay. So, completed the Hodgkin lymphoma group. So now we focus on the non-Hodgkin's, which is a heterogeneous group of neoplasm. And together with this, the Hodgkin's disease, this comprises third important neoplasm as regards children are concerned. And incidence again varies from 12 to 20%. Again, a slight variation as compared to the West. As I told, unusual Hodgkin's lymphoma is still seen below 5 years of age. NHL is generally not seen below 5 years of age. Even most of the centers have not reported cases below 5 years of age. So, as I told you, symptomatology, similar symptomatology coming in a 2 year versus a 7 year will obviously lymphoma will be a clinical possibility for a 7 year old will never be a possibility for a 2 year old unless it's a rare presentation. Okay. Then again, we know that there are 4 subtypes of NHL I've already discussed. And for India, it is said that the B neoplasms, the it's the B mature, it's amongst the B neoplasm, it's either the bucket or the bucket-like or the DLBL. So it is the DLBL which is commoner. But that is not true for our center. We see far more patients of bucket lymphoma as compared to DLBL. But the Indian data does suggest that DLBL overall is commoner than bucket lymphoma. For the T tumors, the T lymphomas, its lymphoblastic lymphoma was far more commoner as compared to ALCL. Understandably, all of us are familiar with this disease type, but then this is cutting sort of compressing too much of information into in our presentation. But yes, we do need to understand that the subtypes of lymphoma these differ in the sort of biology. It's very important to understand this. They differ in their immunophenotype, they will differ in their presentation, they'll differ in their molecular subtyping, and hence the treatment varies. So the first two rows that you see, the bucket and the DLBL, these are the mature V neoplasms. They would differ in their immune phenotyping. I'm not going into the details, the markers are mentioned. Presentation again is intra-abdominal, again different type. You can see more of intra-abdominal for your bucket, nodal or abdomen for your DLBL. Translocations, very typical 814, 822 per bucket, again 814 to 17. We need to be familiar because if there is a doubt at some point, we have to have understanding of this because often the histopathologist may have some confusion. He may say that both are possible. So we would want to order or we would ask for some molecular workup to be done. So hence it's only when we are aware of what translocation to be asked for advice, only then we can get it done. So a knowledge about the major translocation that typify a particular subtype of lymphoma is essential. Okay, so then comes your big group of lymphoma, the lymphoblastic group, where you generally see it's a T group, where we generally see a big mediastinal mass, chest mass is generally the mediastinum, and the mediastinal is generally the T subtype, and there are these few translocations that typify. But here, the histopathology, the clinical presentation is very typical. That if you get a 7 or 8 year old child with superior mediastinal syndrome, a big chest mass, then which maybe may or may not be with some pleural effusion, you know it's going to be a T lymphoblastic lymphoma. So and then so one should be aware of the common clinical presentation. Then comes your last subtype of anaplastic large cell lymphoma. So here again the IHC is very typical. The ALK, the EMA, then the CD30 presentation. So all these are very typical, and of course, you have a wide variety of presentation. It could be as simple as a skin, it could be a lymph node, it could be any viscera involved. Again, these also confers a risk stratification. We'll be seeing that soon. So they have a varied presentation and uh, very presentation, and so hence the risk stratification and the management is also different. So we just see that in the subsequent slides. So before that, there are some age-specific trends in the incidence of NHL, which also correlate with the subtype. So Burkitt and Burkitt type would generally be between 5 to 15 years. Lymphoblastic would be across all age group, but then slightly in the older age group. DLBL would be generally the older. DLBL will not generally come in your younger, 5 or 6 or 7. But in the adolescent, it is fairly common to see a DLBL. Then, of course, it is Burkitt's, and then there are regional variations known. In India, lymphoblastic lymphoma is very common, and your DLBL, other subtype, which is fairly common. We have a lot of associations with NHL. Previous chemotherapy, it can occur as a second neoplasm in children who have got chemotherapy for Hodgkin's disease. Immune deficiency states, DNA repair syndrome, Wiskott-Aldrich, lymphoproliferative disorders, ataxia telangiectasia, post-organ transplantation, EBV infections. All these pose a risk to occurrence or are associated with the occurrence of NHL. If you look at the clinical features, just as this is so heterogeneous, the clinical presentation is also very, very heterogeneous. So NHL is generally said to be a high grade and could be predominantly extranodal also. The sites that are involved extranodally are predominantly the mediastinum, abdomen, head and neck region. And if it is the intrathoracic NHL, it is most often the T subtype, and it will be the lymphoblastic lymphoma, and will generally present with an oncological emergency, something like a superior mediastinal or a superior vena cava syndrome. You can have other associations like pleural pericardial effusion, only adenopathy, simply abdominal presentation, abdominal distension, big palpable masses in the abdomen, features of intestinal obstruction, intussusception, CNS presentation like renal palsies, bony infiltration, jaw pains, cytopenias, bone marrow involvement, renal involvement, manifestations in uh, uh, simply presenting as renal failure, tumor lysis syndrome, coming to a nephrologist and ultimately finding bulky kidneys, tumor lysis, and then picking up what is actually underlying disease being a lymphoma. So you have a highly, highly heterogeneous clinical presentation, and you have to have a high index of presentation um, uh, of suspicion for NHL symptomatology. For example, just a child who was actually this child, just thought of sharing this, was initially treated with our nephrology team as a resistant nephrotic syndrome. He was for years, in fact, he even was treated with rituximab, etc. Till actually one point he was picked up to have a big heterogeneous mass in the lesser sac, in the adjacent to the spleen, in peripancreatic region, ongoing into the pelvis, and ultimately was diagnosed as a Burkitt lymphoma. So these situations occur, and he was highly immune suppressed even prior to this presentation. Then lymphoblastic lymphoma, you have a big anterior mediastinal mass, which are presented with SMS. Then, if you all can see, I cannot see this slide. There was a slide of a girl child with a big neck mass. This was DLBL, and it had bilateral neck mass more on the left side. So this was these are the various presentations of NHL. So treatment of NHL is said to be a success story. In most of the treatments in oncology, pediatric cancers are success story, but they do say specifically for NHL, and because the survival has really, really improved from 50 to 80% in the past 3 decades because of our understanding. As I said, molecular and immunological mechanisms are far more clearer. We know what we are dealing with, what to order, how to reach to a proper diagnosis, or what to ask the histopathologist. So all these really make a difference. Imaging techniques have become highly sophisticated, and there's a lot of improvement in the supportive care. So all this has added to improved survival of our NHL patients. So, and but at the same time, we also know that India has not kept pace with the international standards in this, particularly which is not true for Hodgkin, but which is true for NHL, where we lag behind in outcomes when compared to a Western setting, because a lot of heterogeneity and it is difficult to sort of stick or abide or understand the variability in the protocols that have been, put forth for NHL. Paucity of our own Indian data. We have still data on Hodgkin, but on NHL data is still sparse. Particularly if you look for subtypes of your NHL data is really, really sparse. Then even there is heterogeneity in the at the international standard. So there is a dilemma of the adopting to a most recommended or a standard protocol. So if you look at this is Indian data. Seems dismal, but yes, this is published data from Indian. If you look at more into this is the subtype EFS, but again, the median EFS seems to be really low for the combined group of NHL. But now I think with these the INFOG and all these groups coming up and very focused groups focusing attention and studies and committing to protocols, in the years to come we should have more data and maybe more and more meaningful data will emerge from our own country. So this is what is published. I thought of just sharing this. So this was not very promising. So now coming to this important aspect of staging and risk stratification. So we have to have a imaging modality for staging and response assessment for NHL as we did for Hodgkin's. So CT scan or a PET CT. PET CT is a role as a modality for baseline and follow-up is still investigational. It is not come in the guidelines as has come for Hodgkin lymphoma. So CT is a modality that is used. Even our center is using CT, but PET CT is as a modality in NHL is used on a case-to-case basis. MRI is only generally used for paraspinal lesions or when there is a suspicion of a CNS mass. Otherwise, there is no definite role, to my understanding, for MR. Bone marrow examination and CSF examination are important, are a must, and they are not foregone if a PET CT or a CT is used because they are important for risk stratification. Staging is the Murphy staging, which all of you all know. Everybody is familiar with that. The low and the localized or the low risk and the advanced or the high risk. So there is one point that needs to be shared is that so with evolution of intensive therapy, staging in NHL has a limited prognostic value. For example, what I want to emphasize here is that for the, as I told you in the NHL group, there is one mature B lymphoma, ALCM, and one was the lymphoblastic lymphoma. So for the mature B and the ALCL, your risk stratification is important. Okay. So as has been used by most cooperative groups, and for Burkitt lymphoma, we will be adhering to what is being used by the BFM NHL or the LAM 96 criteria. For ALCL, we'll be using the European Intergroup Study criteria. Okay, so here it is the risk stratification. But for lymphoblastic lymphoma, your usual staging stands valid. So when you are going to, I'll just show you the slides on studies where you will see for lymphoblastic lymphoma, the staging concept of 1, 2, 3, 4 has been used. But for your BNHL and for your ALCL, you're going to use either a risk or your grouping. So these are the terminology that are being used for B lymphomas or for your ALCL. I hope I have made it clear. This is the Stenjut staging. I'm not going. I think everybody in the audience knows this. The localized stage 1 and 2, and the high risk 3 and 4. All of us know the importance of the primary intrathoracic tumor, the mediastinal mass, which immediately puts the patient into a risk 3 or an advanced disease. So almost all of us are familiar with this classification. So then comes this, what I was talking about, this risk grouping. So as I told you, this is for your B lymphoma. Okay, so I told you either you follow the FAB LMB group where you will use ABC. So if it is completely resected or abdominal stage 2, just understand the concept. You will have to refer when you're treating a patient. So I don't even intend that you will memorize this, but we have to know that these are the criteria that we have to use. So either it will be ABC depending on your stage. Okay. So either it is stage 1, 2, stage 1, 2, resected, unresected, puts you into stage A, B, and C. If you're following the BNHL, B lymphoma, FAB, or LMB 96 protocol. If you are following the BFM groups, okay, where you will use the R1, R2, R3. Okay, so this is more cumbersome. At our center, we are using the BFM group, BFM protocols. I follow this R1, R2, R3, where you will use the stage. You will decipher whether the resection is possible or not. You will use the LDH as a modality. Okay, you will use bone marrow and you will use CNS. So all these criteria, once you, this seems more holistic, and you will ascribe a risk to that patient. So if he is B, Burkitt lymphoma, ascribe whether it is R1, R2, R3, R4. If you are using FAB 96, use this criteria, put him into either A, B, or C. So this is the first step. So for ALCL, it is simpler. You will use I told you will use the European Interstudy Group criteria. So here it is low risk, standard, and high risk. So stage 1 would be completely excised. Standard risk would be low risk. In standard risk, it is no involvement of skin, mediastinum, liver, spleen, lungs, or lung. For high risk, it will be biopsy, proven involvement of these cells. So that is how this is important, and we have to adhere to these once we think of treating these patients. We have to give a risk, we have to ascribe a risk, so it becomes easier to choose the protocol. Okay. So then, coming to the exact sort of management principles, so it's a highly curative. Surgery has little role except in diagnosis or in emergency management, or an early stage where it is a completely excise. But as of now, I have yet to see patients where we can cure the lymphomas with just excision of the particular tumor mass. Radiation has little role except in emergencies, particularly in SMS or in a spinal cord compression. So these are the only uh, uh, indicators for radiation use in NHL. You have to decipher whether your child has any need for emergency management. NHL is known to present with either SPCS, SMS, or tumor lysis. So one has to be uh, aware of these emergencies. If they are, then they should be tackled. Supportive care is important. You have to stabilize your child because these are the challenges. Your child will often present with advanced disease, with metabolic complications. He may be into a complete renal shutdown, may require dialysis. So you have to be aware. You have to have your whole team in place because he may just be in lab TLS, he may go into clinical TLS. So he may be in fluid overload. You need to hyperhydrate him. He may have hyperuricemia. So all these metabolic complications need to be tackled, and which could be life threatening. So these are the challenges when you face a child with NHL. In our setting, comorbidities like malnutrition is very important. So we always advocate, being pediatricians, that the child has to be treated as a whole. Nutrition is one important component, and also take care of infections. We know that optimums are going to be far less if a child is malnourished versus a child whose nutrition is well taken care of. And of course, dose modifications are required as per weight, as per the drugs that we use, and as per the weight bands if the child loses or gains weight. So, in the therapeutic considerations, we generally have the chemotherapy prophase. This is important so as to take care of the complications, gives time for you to stabilize your child, and if TLS has to occur, you can tackle the TLS. And another issue that can be handled is the methotrexate administration, because most of these protocols are methotrexate based, where you're using high doses, and anything more than 1 gram will be toxic and will need level monitoring. And at our center, we are resorting to methotrexate level monitoring. So these are the important therapeutic challenges also. And what the broad principle is that we use multi-agent chemotherapy directed by the histologist subtype, stage, this group and these form the cornerstone of therapy for NHLs. So if you look at the mature B lymphomas, the Burkitt or the DLBL, so here the concept is to give pulses of intensive chemotherapy. Short duration, multi-agent, highly intensive chemotherapy protocol cycles are given, generally at intervals of 3 to 4 weeks. And number of cycles will depend on stage. For example, if it is R1 or group A, you will need less number versus if it is R3 or R4. And so therefore, your initial staging and your risk stratification has to be very, very accurate. But basic principle is that you give pulses of intensive chemotherapy, multi-agent chemotherapy. For your lymphoblastic lymphoma, particularly for your T lymphoblastic lymphoma, they will generally do well on your ALL-like protocols. We treat them on leukemia protocols where you need to give them a continuous exposure of chemotherapeutic agents. For your anaplastic variant, there is lack of consensus. Still, there is clarity on the first two groups. In this, there is lack of consensus on as to how you manage. For cutaneous, it is said that you can even, if it is a localized, you can even resort to surgery, radiation, or low dose methotrexate. But if it's a systemic variant, then of course you can use standard or high risk chemotherapy depending on where you have staged your patient as per your risk stratification. So I won't go into the details of these, but yes, the basic principle of what I just told you. For example, just focus on the first group. If it is localized disease, BNHL. Okay, so here you would want either to put him into ABC or R1, R2, R3, R4. Whatever, if it is, supposing it is group A and stage and risk group 1. So here you will use only 2 cycles of whatever you're using. So here again, if you use the BFM protocol, you will give 2 cycles. If you've given CHOP, you will just give 3 cycles. Depending also, these have been defined in the protocol, but your number of cycles are very less. Versus if the stage a little advances, your number of cycles advance. For example, if it is the same protocol, if it's stage 1 and 2, group B, in the same BFM 95, your number of cycles increase as compared to if it was a localized disease or a resectable disease. That was what I was saying, that your number of cycles will vary depending on the stage of your and your risk stratification. And there is, so I'm actually not going into details of these because these are protocol specific and you can read them, and most of you would be actually familiar and would be, with these, and you would be using them. And another thing that I want to say is that for centers which are really have some resource constraint or are not comfortable, you have this option of 842 protocol, NHL 842, which is a very convenient protocol. I have used it earlier when I was a resident, and which is easy to administer and you can handle and is feasible and is fairly respectable results. And people are using it where they are uncomfortable using the high-ended or highly intensive protocols. And also, rituximab can be used or incorporated in high-risk settings, and this has shown to be beneficial. For lymphoblastic lymphoma, again, as I was saying, that here you will use the connotation of stage 1, 2, 3, 4. You have a lot of studies, and depending at whether the CCG, POG, or NHL group, all have their protocols. And currently, for us, we are using the BFM protocols for lymphoblastic leukemia, and we also are using the iCycle protocol. We are participating in the iCycle study, the national-wide multi-centric study. So there we have a provision for treating lymphoblastic lymphoma, only the T variant. So we are using that or the BFM protocols at my center. So for ALCL, again, both options are there. The principle of management, you can use either both leukemia or NHL-like protocols. Again, depends on the stage, and I'm not currently, for want of time, I'm not going into the details of these protocols. So just to sum up, how do we at our center treat? So for us, the determinants are risk and response to treatment. More for response to treatment, specifically it is for Hodgkin's. But the response to treatment is an important attribute even in your NHL. But this is actually forming a very important attribute as regards Hodgkin lymphoma. But it is a modality used for NHL also. So these are the two things that we will really focus on. We focus on complete workup, history, physical examination, basic investigation, biopsy. Excisional load is the rule at our center unless the child is really sick, he is in SMS. Then also we will try for a cell block, FNAC or something. But generally we will resort to a biopsy somehow or the other, even after maybe 48 hours or a little later. But try to reach to a definitive or a documented diagnosis. Then comes your staging, for which you need, for staging component, you will need an imaging modality where it is CT, PET CT, or MR. Ultrasound is not the modality to be used, and but only where you have no option left for any modality, there of course you can resort to ultrasound. But for us, it is either CT or PET CT. Mostly for Hodgkin's, we are using PET CT as a modality, and bone marrow examination. Stabilization of the child once, and particularly if there is an oncological emergency, this is followed by definitive treatment once we have the entire set of reports and we have completed our entire workup. Molecular workup is done wherever feasible and wherever the option of getting it done will improve the risk stratification, and counseling is an important component of management. Then for Hodgkin lymphoma, we use ABBD plus minus IFRT for bulky disease or where there is residual disease. For non-Hodgkin lymphoma, for BFM protocols, high-risk pulses for Burkitt and DLBL, ALL-like protocols for lymphoblastic lymphoma. So this is the algorithm that I follow for our center. So to summarize, or the message that I would want to give to the audience would be that childhood lymphomas form one of the most curable childhood malignancies. This stratification based on stage and unfavorable prognostic factors are really, really important. Once you manage these children, treatment should be protocol specific. Commit to a protocol and then adhere to the protocol. No mixing and matching of protocol should be done. All clarity should be done once you are working up your patient upfront, how you will treat, what are your prognostic markers, what is the risk that you have ascribed. So it has to be, everything has to be clear at presentation. Interim response assessment should be done using a modality, either it has to be CT or a PET CT. Wherever centers have the facility for a PET CT, interim assessment would I would advise PET CT is emerging as a really good modality, and we would explore the possibility of using PET CT even in NHL in the times to come. And PET CT, of course, is the modality for Hodgkin's, and we have given up doing bone marrow as I told earlier. Most centers can forgo doing marrow. It's an invasive procedure, and often you're not able to do when the child is in SMS and where sedation is contraindicated. So PET CT is a good modality for baseline interim assessment and end of treatment assessment for Hodgkin's. Chemotherapy is the mainstay for entire lymphoma set of groups. Radiation has a role in Hodgkin's, little role in NHL. Surgery has no role except in emergency situations. And it's important to include the radiation oncologist, particularly in the treating team when you are planning radiation. So if the child, for example, if the child has bulky disease in Hodgkin's, you know that the child would ultimately require radiation. So it is advisable to include the radiation oncologist upfront because all timing, all protocol planning is done in conjunction with the radiation oncologist. And of course, we didn't touch this aspect, but it is a area domain very dear to me also. I feel very relevant. So therapy related life altering late effects are really, really important and an important concern. So all treatment protocols should keep this important concept of late effects and survivorship in mind while treating a patient. Thank you. So I